The cloth was drawn at 9:30, and the Duke of Rushmere rose and went round the table with his hand out. He had done it at every dinner his mother ever gave, and he did it now the way a man works a latch he has worked 10,000 times. Lady Trewin laid 2 fingers on his palm and rose. The rector's wife took it and rose. A woman down from Shropshire took it without looking up from her plate. 22 at table, and the candles guttering in the heat, and the ruined sweetmeats standing in the middle of the cloth, like something drowned. At the foot of the room, by the service door, stood a woman in a working apron with sugar dust white along the hem. The Duke came down the whole length of the table to her, past the wreckage, past the Trewins, past every face in the county that mattered, and he held out his hand. Maud Ingram looked at it. She looked at it for as long as it takes to say a short sentence out loud, and she did not move. 11 weeks before that, on a Tuesday in the middle of June, she came up the drive on foot from the turnpike with a wooden box on her shoulder and her shoes white with chalk dust. It had not rained in Rushmere since the first week of May. The verges were the colour of old rope. The lime avenue was in full leaf and the leaves were furred grey, and under them the ground had cracked in long seams a finger wide. The house stood at the end of it, honey-coloured, enormous, with 2/3 of its windows shuttered against the sun. The steward met her at the kitchen court. Bicknell was a narrow man of 60 in a coat too good for the yard he was standing in, and he looked at the box on her shoulder rather than at her face. "Miss Ingram," he said, "you are shorter than the letter suggested." "The letter did not mention it," she said. "What is failing here?" Bicknell blinked at her. "I beg your pardon." "The house has not given a dinner in 4 years, and now it must give one in September. Something has gone out of it, and something has to be brought back. I would rather know what before I unpack." He took her through the arch and along a stone passage that ran cool as a cellar, and he told her as they walked. The last confectioner had gone to Bath in the year the old Duke died. The still-room had been shut up. The great copper service was in the plate-room, and nobody living had seen it out. The county said the house was proud. The county said a good many things. And the 2nd of September, Sir Everard Trewin brings his family the last week of August. There is a settlement in discussion. His Grace is to marry Miss Trewin, or so the whole of 2 ridings has decided, and a house that means to marry must feed people first. He stopped at a door at the far end of the passage and turned the key and stood back. The confectionery was a long room with a north window, and it had been stripped the way a room is stripped when nobody expects to want it again. The copper was down off the wall and stacked in a corner with the tinning worn through to the red. The marble slab was cracked across and propped on a barrel. Mice had been in the almond drawer and had left it a nest of shredded paper and shell. Maud set her box on the floor and opened the drawers one after another, all 14 of them, and shut them again. "There is no scale in here," she said. "There is a scale in the kitchen. Everyone uses it. That will do if everyone will let me have it when I want it." She went to the fireplace and put her arm up the flue and brought her hand out black. "This wants sweeping before I light anything, and I shall want charcoal, not coals, and I shall want a great deal of it, and I shall want it in August when the yard will laugh at me. Say now if that cannot be got." "It can be got. Then there are 3 things." She wiped her hand on her apron, unhurried. "The drying room next door is mine, and the key to it is mine, and nobody else carries it. The sugar is bought by my eye and not by the price, and I do not want to be asked in the last week to make something I have not tried." Bicknell considered her. Then he put out his hand. She did not take it. "Not yet," she said. "I take a hand on a thing when the thing is done and not before. On the 3rd of September you may have my hand on it, and gladly. Until then, it is only talk, and talk goes soft in this weather like everything else." She was 24 that summer, She had been bred to the trade from 11 years old in a confectioner's shop under the Abbey at Bath, and the confectioner had died in March, owing more than the stock came to, and the stock had been sold over her head in 2 days, and she had come away with a box of tools, a book, and no character but her own. It is a particular kind of freedom, having nothing left to lose. It makes a person very hard to frighten and very easy to underestimate, and Rushmere was to spend the summer discovering both. She began with the flue and the mice and the crack in the marble, and she had the room habitable in 9 days. The Duke of Rushmere came into it for the first time on the 11th night, at some hour past midnight, in his shirt-sleeves, carrying a lamp. He was a big man who moved quietly, which unsettles people, and he had the look the county called proud, and which was in fact the look of a man who has stopped expecting to be answered. He stood in the doorway and watched her pour a pan of clarified sugar through a straining cloth into a bowl. "There is a fire in this room," he said. "There is. It is the middle of June." "It is." She did not stop pouring. "Sugar takes up water out of the air the way salt does, only worse. If I let this room go cold and damp, everything in it goes limp and weeps and is fit for nothing but the pigs. So there is a fire, and there will be a fire in August, and the yard may say what it likes." He came in and set the lamp on the barrel. "What is that?" "Sugar and water and the white of an egg, beaten in cold before it goes near the heat. The white catches all the dirt in the loaf and carries it up as a scum, and it is skimmed off at the rim, and what comes through the cloth is clean." She held the bowl up to the lamp. "There. A man can read through it." He looked at the copper stacked in the corner. "Half of that is bare. More than half. The tin is gone off the inside of 6 of them. I cannot boil sugar in bare copper." "No," he said. "You cannot." He said nothing further, and went out, and she thought no more of it. On the Friday, a cart came up from Northallerton with the 6 pans on it, retinned, the new tin still bright as a shilling, and a barrel of hardwood charcoal behind them. Nobody said who had ordered them. She asked in the kitchen and got shrugs. She stood the pans on the shelf in order of size and did not mention it either, and that was the first of the 3, though nobody in that house would have called it anything at all. The house had 4 things in it that summer, and everything that happened turned on one or another of them. There was the pinery on the south wall, where Silas Yeo had been forcing pineapples in tan beds for 51 years, and where he now worked with hands so knotted that he could not close them past the second joint. There was the dairy under the north slope, cool as a church, where Dorcas made butter and set cream, and where Dorcas heard perhaps 1 word in 3 of everything said to her, because she was deaf on the left side and had been since a fever. There was the ice house in the shrubbery, a brick well 30 feet deep with a domed roof and a double door, packed the previous January with 200 cartloads of ice broken from the flooded meadow and kept by Amos, who had loaded it and considered it his. And there was the table itself, which had been the pride of the county for 60 years and had not been laid for 4. Maud went to the ice house in her 2nd week, and Amos would not open the inner door. "You may look at the door," he said. "You may not look in past it. Every time that door stands open in summer, that is ice gone. How much is in there? Enough." "Enough for what?" He set his shoulder against the frame. "Enough for the dairy till Christmas, which is what it is for. It is not for turning into fancy work. I shall want about 40 pounds of it a day from the last week of August," she said, "and half of that is going into your dairy's cream, so you may as well hear the whole of it now and be angry all at once instead of a little every day." Amos looked at her for a long moment. He was 50 and short, and his left shoulder sat lower than his right from 30 years of ice tongs. £40 a day, he said, for 9 days. And I want it broken small, and I want bay salt with it, 3 of ice to 1 of salt, and I would rather break it myself than have it fetched up in lumps and left standing in the sun in a basket at the door. You would rather break it yourself? I would. With what? A mallet and a canvas cloth the same as anybody. He chewed the inside of his cheek. Then he pulled the pin and swung the inner door and let out a breath of air so cold it made her shiver in the middle of June, and the pale blue face of the stack stood there in the dark, packed in straw, sweating slowly. There, he said, gruff about it. Now you have seen it, and you will understand why I am careful. There is no more till January, and January is a long way off. It is beautiful, said Maud. Amos shut the door, but he shut it slowly. The wound came out of Silas Yeo on a hot afternoon at the end of the month, in the pinery, with the sun through the glass making the tan beds smell like bread. She had come up to ask him whether a pine would be cut by the 2nd of September, and had stayed to do his watering, because his hands had seized in the heat, and he had been standing looking at the can for some while before she came in. You needn't, he said. I have hands and no work in them this hour. Where does it go, the mulch or the pot? Round the pot, not on the crown. He lowered himself onto the bench. You are a great one for not asking questions. I ask a great many questions. You ask about sugar and coal and ice. He wiped his face with his wrist. You have been in this house 6 weeks, and you have not once asked me why the table stopped. Maud went on watering. It is not my business. It is going to be your business on the 2nd of September, when the county comes in that door looking for a reason to say the house is dead. He was quiet for a moment. Latimer stopped it. Colonel Latimer. He and his Grace were at school together and afterwards in the same regiment, and he was in this house more than his own for 20 years. He was the one who could make him laugh. There is generally one. He died. He did, 4 years ago in October. Silas turned his hands over on his knees and looked at them. He had been failing all that summer, and he wrote in the September asking his Grace to come up to him at Scarborough. They had had words in the spring over money, which is the stupidest thing 2 men ever fall out over, and his Grace was in the right of it, and being in the right of a thing is a great trap. He did not go. He waited 11 days. The old man said it without any weight at all, which was worse. He was not sulking. He is not a sulker. He was making certain he was doing the right thing and turning it over and wanting to be asked again properly, and 11 days went by while he did it. Latimer died on the 10th. His Grace was on the road when it happened, and he came into the house at Scarborough an hour after they had drawn the blinds. Maud set down the can. He has never said one word about it in my hearing, said Silas, and he has never given a dinner since, and the county calls him proud. Well, now you know, and I shall not say it twice, and I shall thank you not to be kind to me about it. I was not going to be. No, he said. That is why you were told. The second private conversation between them came a fortnight later, near midnight again, and was about nothing that could have gone into a letter. He had taken to walking the house at night because he did not sleep well, and the confectionery was the only room with a light in it, and after a while he stopped pretending he had come that way by accident. You are boiling, he said from the doorway. I am. How do you know when to stop? There is no clock in it. There is no clock in anything worth doing. She dipped her forefinger in the water crock, and then in the pan and back into the water, quick as a bird, and rubbed her finger and thumb together. That is pearl. It draws a thread, and the thread will not break. Before that is smooth, and before that is nothing at all. And after pearl is blow. She took the skimmer, dipped it, and blew hard through the holes, and a shower of small bright bubbles flew off the far side of it and vanished. That, then feather, then ball, then crack, and crack is where the spun work lives. Past crack is caramel, and past caramel it is burnt, and there is nothing to be done but throw it out and wash the pan and start again. How long from crack to burnt? Maud considered. In this pan on this fire, about as long as it takes to answer a question at the door. Then do not let me ask any. You may ask. I shall simply not answer until it is off the fire. She lifted the pan and set it on the trivet and stood watching the seethe die down in it. There, now it may be asked anything. He came and stood at the end of the table. She oiled a broom handle and laid it between two chair backs, and took a whisk with the loop cut off it, and dipped the cut ends, and threw. The sugar came off the wires in threads finer than hair and hardened in the air as they flew, and hung across the broom handle in a shining fleece, and the room filled up with the smell of hot sugar and the small dry sound of 100 threads setting. The Duke of Rushmere stood and watched a woman throw light across his kitchen at 1 in the morning, and did not say anything for a long time. How long does it last? On a day like today, a week. On a wet day, an hour and a half, and then it goes soft and lies down, and there is nothing underneath it. She threw again. That is the whole of the trade. It is not difficult to make. It is only difficult to keep. Twice that summer he saw her do something she did not know she was seen doing. The first was in the dairy passage, where Dorcas stood with a pan of cream and the cook shouting at her from the far end, and Dorcas turning her head this way and that, trying to catch it. Maud came past, and without a word or a pause, she moved round to Dorcas's right side and put herself square in front of her and said the message again, slowly, with her face where it could be seen. Then she took the other handle of the pan, and they carried it in together. The second was in the stable yard in the first week of August, when a batch of cream ice had gone gravelly on her, and she carried the whole sabotiere out and gave it to the 2 lads and the boot boy with 3 spoons, and stood in the sun while they ate it and told them exactly what she had done wrong. He was at the window above, and she never looked up. It did something to him he had no name for and no wish to examine. He thought about it that night instead of sleeping, and what he arrived at was very simple and rather bleak, that he had been in that house for 11 years and had never once given anybody anything before it was asked for. On the 9th of August she made him taste ices, and no part of it advanced anything at all. She had 6 of them in pewter pots in the pail. And she stood him at the end of the table with a spoon and a napkin, and would not tell him what any of them were. Lemon, he said. Bergamot. They are the same thing. They are not remotely the same thing, and if you say that in front of Sir Everard, I shall be obliged to leave the county. She scraped the second pot down the side and worked it back in. Again, he tried again. Lemon. That is orange flower. It is not. It is orange flower, and a little orange flower goes into a great many things, and you have been eating it all your life without knowing. She handed him the third. This one you will get. He put the spoon in his mouth and stopped. That, he said, is bread. Brown bread ice. Crumbs dried in the oven till they are toasted through and crushed and into the cream. She was delighted with him and made no attempt to hide it. Half the county thinks it a joke played on them by London. It is a joke played on them by London. It is the best thing on this table, and I shall put it in front of Lady Trewin and watch her face. He worked through the rest of them. He got the pineapple, because he had grown up smelling the pinery, and he missed the ratafia entirely, and he said the 6th was strawberry when it was raspberry, and Maud sat down on the barrel and put her apron over her face. It is not a moral failing, he said. It is very close to one. They are both red. So is a brick. She wiped her eyes. Try it once more, and think of the seeds. There are no seeds in a strawberry that anybody notices, and there is nothing but seeds in a raspberry, and the seeds get into everything, and I strain them out 3 times, and some of them still get through. And that little gritty ghost of a thing on the back of your tongue is the raspberry telling you it was there. He tasted it again, seriously. Raspberry, he said. There, that is 1 out of 6, and a great deal better than the rector. When did you feed the rector ices? I did not. I merely know." They argued for a quarter of an hour after that about the pineapple, which he said was the finest fruit grown in England, and which she said tasted of nothing whatever except the immense amount of trouble it had cost, and neither of them gave an inch, and Silas Yeo was invoked by both sides in his absence, and would have sided with neither. "You have a fire going," he said at the end, at the door, in August. "I have, and I shall have it in September, and if the world lasts, I shall have it in July. The kitchen calls you the woman who is cold in summer. The kitchen may call me what it likes, so long as it lets me at the scale." Dorcas came to the confectionery 2 days later with a bowl of clotted cream she had not been asked for, and stood in the doorway, turning it round in her hands. "That is beautiful," said Maud, facing her. "That is the best crust I have seen since Somerset. It is for the ratafia thing." Dorcas set it down, then she did not go. "I came to say, about the passage in June, and the pan. There is nothing to say about the passage. There is, though." Dorcas looked at the floor and then made herself look up. "There is nobody in this house talks at my face. They shout at my back and then they say I am stupid and I have got so as I let them because it is easier. And you come along and stand yourself in front of me like it is nothing at all and go on doing it every day since, and never once made a thing of it, and I have wanted to say it for 2 months and could not get it out." "Then it is out," said Maud. "It is out." Dorcas laughed, wetly. "You will want more cream by Friday. I shall want a great deal more cream by Friday." "You shall have it," said Dorcas, "and you shall have it first, before the house, and I do not care who hears me say it." The trouble in the ice house came on the night of the 17th of August, and Amos was 6 miles away at his brother's. Maud went down at 10 at night for the morrow's ice and heard the water before she had the outer door open. When she brought the lamp in, she saw that the whole floor of the well was standing in 3 inches of black water, and the straw at the base of the stack was sodden and green, and the ice above it had gone glassy and rotten where it stood in the wet. She ran for the house and met the Duke of Rushmere in the shrubbery walk coming the other way, because he had seen her lamp going down at that hour and had come after it. "The sump is choked," she said. "It has been going for days. The bottom 4 feet is rotting, and when the bottom goes, the whole stack settles into the water, and by Michaelmas there will not be a pound of it left." He did not ask a single question. He took the lamp out of her hand and went down the steps into the water. They worked from 10 at night until 4:15 in the morning, and there was nobody to see any part of it. He got the sump grate up with an iron bar and put his arm into it to the shoulder and dragged out 4 years of straw and chaff and rot, packed hard as felt, handful after handful, until the water began to turn and go down with a sound like a throat clearing. She went at the stack with the tongs and the ice saw, cutting away the rotten, glassy stuff at the base and heaving it up the steps into the shrubbery to melt, and then packing fresh straw from the barn under and round what was sound, course after course, on her knees in the wet. They spoke perhaps 30 words the whole night, and most of those were about where to put a thing. Near the end her hands stopped working properly, the way hands do in ice, and she could not get the twine round a truss. And he came and knelt in the water beside her and held the truss while she tied it, and neither of them looked up, and the tying took a long time. At 4:15 they came out and sat on the brick steps in the shrubbery with the doors barred behind them. The drought had not broken. The sky over the limes was the colour of a peach, and it was already warm, and the birds were going mad. "How much have we lost?" he said. 9 or 10 cartloads. There are 140 left, and they are dry, and they will keep." She was shaking. "Your dairy is safe till Christmas." "My dairy," he said. "It is your dairy." He looked at his hands, which were cut across the palms in 2 places, and said nothing at all for a while. "I have not done a night's work in this house since I inherited it," he said. And then he stood up and gave her his arm because she could not feel her feet, and they went up the walk in the light together and did not say one word more. "Wherever this finds you tonight, is it warm where you are, or have you the window open to whatever the dark is doing? Settle in, if you can." There is a good deal still to come, and the worst of it is not the cold part. Miss Verity Trewin came down to the confectionery on the 29th of August, alone, at 11 in the morning, and stood among the copper in a gown the colour of a dove's breast. She was 22 and had been beautiful since she was 15, and she had been trained the way a hawk is trained, and she had the trick of standing very still while other people arranged themselves around her. "So this is it," she said. "Papa says the whole dinner is being made in one room by one woman, and I said that could not be right. It is mostly right. How queer." She went along the shelf, touching things, not quite picking them up. "What is this?" "Gum tragacanth in soak. It makes a paste that dries hard and holds a shape." "And this?" "Bitter almonds. 6 of those would make you very ill, so I would rather you did not." Verity took her hand back and laughed prettily. "You are blunt." "I am busy. It is easily mistaken." "Yes." She sat down on the barrel, arranging her skirt, and looked up. "I shall tell you why I came, because I think you are a person who prefers it. On the 2nd of September, my father and his Grace will sit down after the ladies withdraw and settle what I am worth, and on the 3rd the county will know, and by the 10th it will be in the London papers. Everything in this house is arranged towards that. Do you understand? I understand the dinner is important. The dinner is the announcement." Verity's voice was perfectly level. "So I should like to know whether it is true that His Grace comes down to this room at night." Maud went on stirring. "He walks the house at night. He does not sleep. Anybody here will tell you that." "That is not what I asked." "It is the answer to what you asked." "No." Verity stood up. "You are a servant in a stone passage, and I am asking you a question, and I should like the courtesy of a straight one." "Then here is one." Maud lifted the pan off and set it down and turned round. "He has stood in that doorway perhaps a dozen times this summer and watched sugar being boiled, because there is a fire in here and a light in here, and everywhere else in this house is shut up and dark. That is all of it. And it will go on until the day I am paid and go, and then he will walk somewhere else." Something happened in the room then that neither of them said out loud. Verity heard the flatness of it. She heard that it was not a denial because there had been nothing to deny, and she heard, underneath, that this small square woman with sugar on her sleeve was not frightened of her in the least, and that the fear was all running the other way and had been all along. "You are not what I expected," she said at last. "People seldom are." "No." Verity went to the door and stopped there. "I have been brought up to be looked at, Miss Ingram, and a thing that is looked at can be put down again, and there is nothing underneath it when it is. You would not know anything about that. I know a great deal about things that go soft when nobody is minding them." Verity Trewin left the room and did not come back, and said only one thing more to her in public 4 days later at the ice in front of 6 ladies, and it was this: "That is the sugar woman. My aunt had a girl who did sugar. They are so particular." It was very lightly done. 2 of the ladies laughed. The 3rd of the quiet things had already happened by then, and it was the one that undid her. She came in on the last morning of August, and the cracked marble had gone from the barrel, and there was a new slab in its place, 4 feet by 2, set on a proper frame and set low. Set at the height of her own hand, which was 5 inches below where any slab in any kitchen in England stood, because she was a short woman and had worked her whole life reaching up. There was a lamp on a bracket beside it, and a trivet made to fit her smallest pan, and no note, and nobody said anything, and when she saw him at noon in the courtyard, he talked about the weather, and did not so much as glance at her hands. That night the drought broke. It came in warm and heavy from the west at about 8 o'clock, thunder walking up and down the ridge for an hour without much rain in it, and then the rain, and then the air after the rain, which was the wettest air Rushmere had breathed since April. Maud went round the drawing room at 10 with a candle, as she had gone round it every night that summer. The stove was in, the shutter was barred. The gum paste work stood on its boards in ranks, the pieces of the great basket, the shells, the 140 leaves, everything she had built since the 12th of August. She put her hand flat on the board, and the paste was dry as chalk. She took the whole basket, assembled on its board, to the kitchen scale, and weighed it, as she had weighed it every third day since she began, and she wrote in her book in her small upright hand, 31st of August, 10 at night, 2 pounds and 11 ounces. Then she locked the door and put the key in her pocket and went out into the wet grass because she could not sleep, and sat on the mounting block in the dark. She had known for some while. She simply had not made herself say it in words, and there is a difference. She said it now. He was kind to her because she was useful, and because a man who cannot sleep will talk to whoever is awake, and because he was paying in the only currency he had a debt to a dead friend he had not gone to. That was the whole of it. A retined pan is not a courtship. A slab set low is a man who notices things, and there were 400 people in the world he might have noticed, and she happened to be the one in the room. On the 2nd of September, he would announce his marriage to a girl bred for it since she was 15, who would be beautiful in that house for 40 years, and whose name would go on the stone with his. And on the 3rd he would pay her 14 guineas, and thank her properly, because he was a courteous man, and she would go down the lime avenue with her box on her shoulder, and that would be the end. The rain started again, small and warm, and she sat in it. She did not cry for very long, and she did not decide anything, and nobody came out to her. She thought about the 14 guineas and where she might go with them, and whether Bath would have her back, and she found that she could not care about it at all, and that frightened her more than anything else that summer had done. Then she wiped her face with the flat of her hand, and got down off the block, and went in and slept 4 hours, and was up at 5, because there was a dinner on the 2nd, and the ice had to be broken. At noon, on the 2nd of September, she took the basket out of the drying room, and knew before she had it off the board. The shutter stood open 8 inches. The stove was out. The paste had gone the colour of a fingernail, and the fine leaves had lain down along their own edges, and the spun work over the top of it had collapsed into a wet fleece, and when she lifted a shell of it, the shell bent in her hand like leather. There were 4 hours to dinner. She did what could be done, which was to make plain what could not be beautiful. She stripped the whole thing to its frame, sent up the ices and the jellies and the ratafia cakes, and set the ruin of the basket in the middle of the cloth, because there was nothing else of that size to put there, and it stood in the candlelight in front of 22 people, weeping quietly onto the silver. Lady Trowyn said it was very original. The rector's wife said nothing, and Verity Trowyn, white to the lips, looking at the man who had not once looked at her all evening, said clearly into a silence, "She did it herself. There is not a house in England where such a thing happens by accident." The Duke of Rushmere said nothing. He said nothing while Bicknell was sent for. He said nothing while Bicknell, wretched, asked Miss Ingram for the keys of the confectionery and the drying room in front of the whole table. He said nothing for an hour, and then he rose and drew the ladies out with his hand held out down the length of the table, the way his mother had taught him, all the way to the service door where Maud Ingram stood in her working apron. And she looked at his hand and she did not take it, and she said, "Not yet." Then she went down to the kitchen and sat by the fire all night with her book open on her knee. At 7 the next morning she went up the passage and into the great kitchen and asked in a perfectly ordinary voice for the scale. They came because Bicknell fetched them, Sir Everard in his travelling coat, and Lady Trewin, and Verity, and 4 of the household, and Dorcas at the back by the door, and the Duke of Rushmere, who stood where he could see and did not sit down. Maud set the ruined basket on the scale, and moved the brass weights along until the beam stood level. £3 and 1 ounce, she said. Bicknell, will you read it so that it is not my word? £3 and 1 ounce, said Bicknell. She opened her book on the table and turned it round. On the 31st of August at 10 at night, I weighed this same work on this same scale and wrote it down, £2 and 11 ounces. Every third day since the 12th of August, it is in this book, and it goes up by ½ an ounce and down by ¼ and up again, because that is what sugar does. Between Tuesday night and yesterday noon, it gained 6 ounces. Sir Everard said, "What of it?" "Sugar takes water out of the air. That is not an opinion. It is the reason this trade keeps fires in August, and the reason every confectioner in England is thought half mad. 6 ounces of water walked into that basket out of the wettest night since the spring." She put her finger on the page. "There is no carelessness of mine that can add 6 ounces to anything. There is no malice of mine that can either. I could have dropped it or crushed it or thrown it in the yard, and it would still have weighed £2 and 11 ounces this morning. Weight only comes from air. The drying room has a stove in it and a shutter that His Grace hung himself in June, and it fits so close that it wants a knee to shut it. I barred it at 10 on Tuesday night, and I have the only key to the door. At noon yesterday the stove was cold and the shutter stood open the width of my hand. That is all I have to say, and all of it can be tried by anybody in this room in 3 days with a bag of sugar and a scale." There was a long silence. Then Dorcas came forward from the door, twisting her apron, and stood where she could see faces. "I was up at 4, she said. "I am up at 4 every day of my life, for the setting. I come along the north passage and I saw Miss Trowin at the drying-room window in the yard with a candle and the shutter open, and she went in and stood a minute and come out again." She swallowed. "I am deaf, and I am counted stupid in this house, and I know very well what it is worth, a person like me saying a thing like that about a person like her. But I saw it, and there is an end." Verity Trowin stood absolutely still for perhaps 4 seconds. Then it went out of her all at once, the way a sail goes when the wind drops, and what was underneath was not wickedness at all. "He never came," she said. "In 11 days he never once." Her voice failed, and she started again, and it came out very fast and very young. "I have been trained since I was 15 for this, and I have nothing else. Nothing, there is nothing else I am for. And he walked past me every day of that week to go down a stone passage, and I thought if the dinner were plain, if it were only plain—" She stopped. "I did not think it would hurt anybody. I thought it was only sugar." Her mother said her name once, from very far away. Verity put her hands over her face in front of all of them, and stood there. Maud shut the book. "It was only sugar, ma'am," she said. "And you did not spoil the dinner. The weather spoiled the dinner. You opened a window on the wettest night of the year, and if it had been dry, you would have done nothing at all." Silas Yeo found her in the pinery at 6 that evening, packing her small tools into the wooden box in the order she always packed them. "So you are off," he said. "On the carrier's cart at 8 in the morning. I am paid to the 3rd, and it is the 3rd. He has not spoke to you?" "No." She wrapped the copper skimmer in flannel. "Nor should he. There is a family in this house whose daughter has been shamed in a kitchen in front of 6 people. And there is a settlement that will not be signed now, and every bit of that came up out of my room. A man does not thank the person who did that to him, whatever the rights of it. That is not what happened, and you know it. It is what it will look like from London." She stopped with the flannel in her hands and looked down the long glass at the sun going along the wall. "It does not matter greatly. I have been thinking about it since June, and I've got it into words at last, and the words are these. Nothing keeps its shape by itself. Not sugar, not ice, not a house, not people. It holds while somebody stands by it, minding the fire and barring the shutter, and the day nobody stands by it, it goes down. That is not sad. It is only the terms." "And who has been standing by you?" "I have," said Maud Ingram, "for 13 years, and I shall go on, and I am not to be pitied for it. and if you say one kind word to me now, I shall be no use to anybody for an hour." Silas Yeo looked at his ruined hands. "I shall cut you a pine," he said, "for the road. They are not ripe till October." "Then it will be a poor thing," said the old man, "and you will eat it anyway." At 7:30 the next morning, the carrier's cart stood in the kitchen court with her box on it, and the Truins' chaise stood in the front court with the horses too, and there were 19 people in the yard, because news travels through a house faster than fire. The Duke of Rushmere came out through the arch, bareheaded, and stopped in front of her. "I stood in my own dining room," he said, "for an hour." He stopped. He began again, somewhere else. "There was a part of that hour when I thought it might be true, not because of anything you have ever done, because it is easier to think a thing is true than to move." His jaw worked. "That is the whole of what is wrong with me, and it has cost me—" He did not finish it. Nobody in the yard breathed. "I have not said a true thing out loud in front of people in 4 years, he said. "So this is badly done, and it will have to serve. I let a man take your keys, and I said nothing, and I am ashamed of it, and I shall be ashamed of it a long while." He put out his hand, palm up, between them, in front of the household and the Truins' coachman and Bicknell and Amos and Dorcas and all of them. "Do not get on the cart. Stay. Not in the confectionery. Here." They were married in the last week of October, in the church at the bottom of the park, and the county came because the county always comes. The table did not become what it had been. It became something else. 11 or 12 people 3 or 4 times a year, and a great deal of noise, and the dessert always plain and always exactly right. Dorcas had the dairy under her own hand within the 12-month and a girl beneath her, and the girl was made to stand where she could be seen when she spoke, and complained about it, and did it. Amos gave up the ice house key in June and said it was because of his shoulder. Silas Yeo cut 4 pines for the wedding and said in front of everybody that they were poor things, which was a lie, and lived to cut 3 more seasons after it. Verity Truin married a man with a wet garden in Devon 18 months later, where nothing in the way of sugar work is expected of anybody, and those who saw her said she seemed easier there than she had ever been in Yorkshire. And in June of the following year the cloth was drawn at 9:30, and the Duke of Rushmere rose at his own table with 14 people at it and the windows open on the limes. He did not go round the room. He stood where he was, at the head, and put his hand out down the length of it towards the other end, where his wife sat with sugar dust on her cuff because she had been in the confectionery until 7 and had not troubled to change. Everyone at that table saw it. That was rather the point of it. Maud Ingram got up and came the whole length of the room and put her hand in his and did not hesitate at all because the dinner was on the table and the thing was done, and because nothing in this world holds its shape by itself and somebody had stood by it and gone on standing. What is it in your life, do you think, that keeps its shape only because you are still minding the fire and barring the shutter against the weather? Whatever it is worth the coals. Come back and sit with me again when you can.